Good evening, Zambia. This is Season 1, Episode 1 of the DBM Chat Hour podcast. Tonight, we will be tackling the question, why is realizing self-identity so important? Welcome to the DBM Chat Hour podcast. My name is Blessed, live streaming all the way from Lusaka, Zambia. Blessed is an ardent advocate for order, process, a methodical, objective, and productivity-based approach to life. She is an organization and human development specialist with over 15 years working with people from both inside and outside organizations within both formal and informal settings and across the public sector, private sector, and civil society. If you are tuned in today and either just about to start your career, have just begun your career, or are midway through your career, about to retire, or are already retired, this podcast is designed just for you. The DBM Chat Hour podcast, for which DBM is an acronym and stands for Destiny-Based Mandate, is the DBM Life version of the DBM series. DBM Business and DBM Enterprise are both part of the DBM series and are intended to enable the process to build, develop, and maintain your business or your enterprise. The DBM Life series is a toolkit that helps personal, institutional, and national level growth and development with the application of basic universal results-based indicators. Indicators that are not uncommon and broadly used by many of us in our day-to-day lives. The use of these indicators spans across multiple ages, including teenagers, young adults, and even children. These universal indicators are identity, mission, and vision, or identity, mandate, and purpose, depending on which way you choose to look at it. The former if you're approaching this from a professional angle, and the latter if you're approaching it from a spiritual perspective. The DBM Chat Hour will be broadcast across 3 seasons, each season consisting of 7 episodes. The first season will focus on identity, the second season will focus on mandate, and the third will focus on purpose. We will hold this hopefully engaging conversation over a period of 21 episodes and slightly over 5 calendar months. To maneuver our way through these key life milestones, which may sometimes seem like a formless void or endless maze, let us first begin this journey by exploring identity. Everyone undoubtedly has an individuality that they identify with on a daily basis. Everyone also has a mission for whatever it is they intend to execute on any given day, and everyone has a goal or set of goals that they wish to accomplish on a daily basis. This unconscious loop of activities is what drives us daily, knowingly or unknowingly. This is what often literally keeps us going from one day to the next. Some of us approach this process consciously, and others yet approach it unconsciously. Nonetheless, we all approach it in one way or another. Despite having such a consistent relationship with these milestone benchmarks of object and outcome that are not uncommon to many, we sometimes neglect to apply them to our lives on a long-term basis or for futuristic purposes. This podcast aims at navigating how to streamline these benchmarks in a simple but deliberate and objective manner that can be both rewarding as well as fulfilling. My first inspiration to begin this podcast was knowing that my own personal mandate is dependent on walking others through this very process, and in doing so helping many to find order and objectivity in their own lives, to understand their own mandate and begin to pursue purpose. My second inspiration is birthed from envisaging a Zambia with a holistic and streamlined governance system emanating from the basic unit of a self-governed individual. Whereas, and self-governance is only achieved where there is clarity, accountability for self-identity. Discovering self-identity in itself can be a tedious, lifelong process and must be approached intentionally. From personal interactions, I have come to learn that not only young people but also middle-aged and even sometimes mature-aged individuals who are well-accomplished professionals struggle with lack of fulfillment despite their many significant professional achievements. This is because career alone without mandate and purpose is meaningless. Career is often a means to an end and not an end in itself. Career and mandate are also two very different elements and should never be interchanged. Career is often a springboard from which we can launch our mandate, and as such should never be undermined, but at the same time should never be overrated. Career facilitates the execution of mandate and plays a significant role in mandate, but again is only a means to an end. During today's episode, we will first look at identity to lay a foundation to answer the question, why is realizing self-identity so important? Allow me to quote Erikson's publication of 1988, and I open quote. Among the first to define the name and content of the concept of identity was Erikson, who mostly defined identity as a subconscious process that merges a personality into a single whole and forms links between the individual and the social world. Erikson, 1988, close quote. I will take the liberty to build on this definition for the sake of simplicity and define identity as, open quote, that which God, in his process of creating you, defined you, and what supernatural, internal and external elements influence your personality to fulfill his mandate and purpose. Close quote. Because all these elements influence personality and character, and because we will be constantly referring to this definition, let us simplify the definition of identity as, open quote, a summation of one's unique personality and character, close quote. We must understand firstly that personal identity is not one's name. Knowing what identity is and defining your identity are two different things. We have established the definition of identity generically. Now let us learn how to define our own personal self-identity. Come with me as we take this journey. I tend to ascribe to Erikson's school of thought and agree with the argument that identity can be described with the answer to the question, who am I? Let us now break down identity. Self-identity should never be confused with the term commonly known as personal branding. With all due respect, I believe branding should be limited only to institutions, products, and livestock, for the simple reason that branding is both highly commercialized, like many other things in society today, and is more or less a campaign to seek affirmation of a claimed identity on a market other than an expression of an already established one. It's a common trend today for people to aspire for a particular brand identification in the marketplace, for purposes of being associated with a certain lifestyle, income bracket, or niche demographic. Celebrities and socialites have placed highly overrated price tags on this, perpetuating a constant rat race to determine who emerges the most popular brand. Unfortunately, in doing so, instinctively labeling the regular individual or non-celebrity as insignificant. Please understand that this is by no means a celebrity campaign of people who seek reaffirmation of their personal branding through reality shows and other market platforms. To the contrary, I like to refer to it as an aspiration for everyone who genuinely desires to search for self-identity with a passion to find purpose. Despite this hype and popularity of personal branding, I have a different school of thought for one simple reason. A human being is not a commodity or an enterprise, and neither should a human being be subjected to the new product development process popularly referred to on the market as NPD. A human being is a living soul that is worth much more than a set of brand characteristics. A soul that is made in the very image of God. To understand self-identity, one needs to understand that we were created in the image of God. Most statistics related to identity crisis today focus more on the symptoms of identity crisis rather than the root cause. A majority of the population today suffers diagnosed or undiagnosed identity crisis. Many teenage suicide cases in Zambia are not reported as directly linked to identity crisis, but something more specific such as drug or alcohol abuse, of which both are often triggered generally by identity crisis. Certain phases that people go through either during teenage years or middle age are often to do with misplaced or mistaken identity. Why do I say so? Firstly, identity crisis carries some sort of social stigma because no one wants to be associated with not knowing who they are. Secondly, a lot of people, as well as academic publications, often box identity crisis as occurring only within parameters of life-changing stages such as teenage years, completing college or university, starting a new career, losing a job, getting married, or even having children. Identity crisis can happen at absolutely any stage in one's life. Irrespective of at what stage it happens, the affirmative approach is to realize identity. My emphasis of the realization other than the development or creation is very simple. We cannot adopt an identity that has not been already given to us by God, let alone to develop or create it. We can only at best realize, discover, or define an existing identity. Identity is something assigned to us before birth and affirmed by characteristics such as our birthplace, our birth date, the constellation of stars under which we were born, our birth element, a prophetic name that we may have been given, and many other more factors. We will, however, not go into these specific details in this episode, but may revisit them at a later stage. Irrespective of which stage we are in life, when we are in an identity crisis, we either fail to realize who we are or prefer to accept what we are associated with as who we are for social reasons. There are many reasons for either one. We can fail to realize who we are for the simple reason that we have not deliberately asked ourselves that question. Maybe it's because its importance has never been apparent to us, or because we simply enjoy the assumed identity we have been bestowed with by friends, family, community, and even society. Accepting a status quo identity for such reasons can be very harmful. One way to discover whether we are uncertain about our self-identity or not is what I like to refer to as the mandate litmus test. If we understand our mandate, it is because we preliminarily most likely have a clear definition of our identity. If we do not understand our mandate, it is highly likely that we do not have a clear definition of our self-identity. Therein lies the importance of self-identity. Without realizing self-identity, it is almost impossible to understand mandate. Without understanding mandate, it is almost impossible to pursue purpose. Notice how this pattern seems oddly and frighteningly familiar. In life, if you do not know the identity of an object, it is unlikely that you will know what it is used for. Let's take, for example, a motor vehicle. Its identity is a vehicle, not necessarily the name of the vehicle. However, certain motor vehicle manufacturers have deliberately given their products names not only as a brand differentiator, but also to align them with their brand association. The identity is a vehicle. The name, for purposes of not promoting any particular brand, we shall call X Factor, and the mandate of the vehicle will be to either transport, provide leisure, or sporting. Its purpose to deliver its passengers from point A to point B. If someone does not know what the identity of this object is, it is highly unlikely that they will understand its mandate or its purpose. Without knowledge of the identity of an object, this object is likely to be misapplied in use or simply abused. This happens often with human beings as well, when they find themselves in wrong relationships where one fails to appreciate the other's identity and therefore abuses them. The danger in not realizing self-identity is abuse by self or others, but more often than not by self, thereby giving others the silent permission to abuse them. This is the reason why certain people are constantly prone to abuse. It is not always necessarily the abuser that triggers the abuse, but sometimes the victim permits this abuse. The journey of discovering self-identity is an intimate one that calls for our honesty and self-transparency. If we are not honest with ourselves during this process, we tend to miss the beautiful opportunities to reinforce existing strengths within us and harness existing weaknesses and use them for good. One of the DBM Life mentorship exercises is to establish one self-identity ratio using a self-identity calculator. Because man instinctively is inclined to make himself look good by identifying more with strengths than weaknesses, it is always a rude shock for participants when they find that their input results in a negative score. Weaknesses do not always have negative implications, but do so only when we do not know the purpose of that weakness. I will share my own personal experience using this tool and give a very simple example about the power of weakness. One of my many weaknesses is lack of patience. Like I say, I acknowledge and appreciate that this is a weakness. However, knowing that it is a weakness and how to embrace it are two different things. I learned during my search for self-identity that because of my personal mandate, this weakness is a necessity. In life, we find ourselves being placed in various teams for various purposes, and it is not always that every team member will have the same healthy level of urgency. Every team needs at least one team member to have a propensity towards getting things done as quickly as possibly attainable, for the simple reason that that team's goal must be accomplished within a certain time frame. I think you can guess where this element of impatience comes in handy. The negativity of impatience seamlessly transitions into the positivity of tenacity or steadfastness. The trick is to know how to harness a weakness by exploring its mirror image and using it for good. This can be likened to a popular spiritual teaching I have learned over the years that states that wisdom has two sides, judgment and mercy. That was just an example, however. We are not going to go off on that trajectory. Self-identity is a journey through understanding one's personal characteristics, personality, weaknesses, strengths, talents, competencies, and habits. Note that these are all inherent characteristics and do not include acquired skill or professional abilities or qualifications for that matter. This is because mandate and career are two distinct and separate platforms, one facilitating the other. The point at which your career and instinctive passion meets is often the beginning of mandate towards purpose. Next week, we shall continue to explore identity, but before moving on to the next facilitating question, we will take time to respond to all your questions that are being posted in the comments below the link. Most of the answers to your questions will transition us into the next episode, where we shall explore the question, what do the different identity crises look like? During that session, we shall have a conversation about the broad categories of identity crisis, as well as the subsequent types of identity crisis that emerge from these broad categories. We will not, however, go into clinical definitions or identify crisis, but rather retain our focus on the layman's level of definition to ensure that the conversation is broadly embraced and that many of us are able to easily identify with the narratives of the conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel by pressing subscribe below the link. Like and share across your other social media platforms if you found this link useful. Remember to post your comments and questions below to be part of this conversation. Next week, we will begin the chat hour by answering as many of your questions as possible, then bridge our conversation to answering the question, what do the different identity crises look like? Tune in next week. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow. DBM is your pleasure and our business.